Brian didn't have any friends in the local area or any friends that he was still in contact with. And he also had no family contact at this point as well. So Brian was very much isolated. So Brian came to us in the spring of 2022. When he arrived, he'd come from another setting because they were no longer able to manage him and look after him. He came with really limited life history. We pretty much knew he was Brian, we knew his age, we knew his diagnoses. He missed out on quite a lot of things over the spring as well. So a lot of the activities we had, a lot of the singers that would come in and perform, Brian would not leave his room for. He just did not want to go. He wouldn't come out into the lounge and have meal times with other residents. Pretty much other than the carers and the nurses who would go in to see him, those were the only faces that he would see throughout the day. And it would be for very short amounts of time because he didn't want you in there. I think where he'd moved homes before, I think there was a real level of distrust and like that we were just going to let him down or move him on, and he didn't want to build those relationships and like being vulnerable with us or talking to us, kind of letting us in. I think Brian was worried that he'd then have to move and it would be painful, and he didn't want that. I ended up doing some training about life histories and working with behaviours that challenge, and I signed up to do a year-long mentorship with the charity, and I knew instantly that Brian was going to be my focus. And I think when we do life histories within the home, we have a book with a set of questions, and it's really easy to try and work your way through it and focus on that. And the skills I gained had been about getting more creative with it. And then eventually it was little questions just like, oh, how are you? Or, oh, that's a nice jumper you've got on. Where did you get that from? And he had this little stack of train cards for the old like projector things that you spin and they go through. So it'd just be, oh, what are those? And sometimes I don't want to talk about it. No, thank you. No. But he was no longer saying get out, which was a massive thing. He was comfortable with me being in there. And then it was just asking him little things about his room. And then eventually it kind of got to the point where it was like, okay, gonna have to try something now, because it's great that I can sit with him and be with him, but I do want to get him talking and I want to get to know him. So I went in with a map of the London Underground because we also knew he worked there or lived there at some point. We weren't too sure. And I just started chatting to him about going to London, where my friends lived, where I'd visited, not expecting anything back from him. And he pointed at Euston Station and was like, well, I worked there. I was like, oh, that's nice. What did you do? And he was like, oh, ticket office. And that's when he kind of started to open up, and he'd start pointing at different stations, being like, well, I lived here, my school was here, I used to travel along this route. And that was kind of like our point in with Brian. So from there, he told us about his family, his work. He didn't ever tell us kind of how he came to Somerset, but we kind of gathered it was steam trains. He loved them. So from that point, he'd let me and a couple other people come and sit with him in his room. And sometimes if he wouldn't want to talk, we would just sit there and listen to music. And I would just put on playlists of kind of 60s, 70s, 50s music, because again, do you like music? No, I don't. Do you want to listen to? No. So I'd just be like, can I play my music? And he'd be like, yeah, that's fine. And we had You'll Never Walk Alone come on again. And it's the only song he ever sung to. And I was like, how do you know this, Brian? And he was like, well, I love Liverpool. He's like, I've been to Anfield like loads of times. I was like, oh, okay. So then we could go in and we'd watch old highlights together. I'd keep him updated on what was going on to the best that I can. And that was just another thing that he got to enjoy. From building those bonds, he started to come out of his room. For a while, he'd only come out and sit with me, kind of in the lounge or doing group activities. He didn't necessarily want to engage with our other residents, but he was out and he was watching and observing. It was amazing. And then eventually he started growing confidence, and I think he saw that like we were going to be here, but like we didn't have to be with him, and he had confidence in himself, and he started engaging in the activities like bingo and the active games. And I was able to kind of go and be like, oh, I'm just popping to the kitchen, I'm just going to go check on 13 or whoever. And he'd be like, okay, I'll see you in a minute. And I'd be like, yeah, I'll see you in a minute. And he just kind of blossomed and became his own man again, which was amazing. We were just talking about steam trains, and I happened to ask, have you ever done the Bishop's Lydiard to Minehead steam train? And he was like, I've done it once. I loved it. I'd love to go again. So we were like, okay. I was like, hold that thought. Let me go talk to activities. So I whizzed down to the office, asked them if something that we could do. They were like, absolutely. So we had a little look at the scheduling, and there was one day left, which was the next day before they went on to their Christmas run. So we asked Brian, and we were like, would you mind going on a Christmas train? We were like, there'll be lights and stuff that you can see. There might be a bit. And he was like, no, absolutely not. I want to go on the regular steam train. And by our activities team being amazing, they got him on that train the next day. It's quite a big outing for someone who hasn't left the home in about a year. And there were naturally some concerns over if he would be okay. Quite an anxious gentleman at times. But again, he was just superb. He wanted to chat to everybody, any animals, any dogs. He was giving them all the love. There was a ticket lady, and he'd worked in the ticket office. So he was asking her loads of questions about steam trains, how she'd like come into the job, if she enjoyed it. And he was just sharing his stories of working in a ticket office without being prompted. And yeah, that was a really just special trip for him. And he collected everything from the receipts to his ticket, lots of photos, and he sat with us and we made a lovely little scrapbook. And then that was one of the things he was really proud of. And he would show us all every day, just being like, do you remember? And we'd be like, we remember, and we'd go through it together. It was lovely. And Brian also had undiagnosed autism that hadn't been formally diagnosed, but was kind of accepted that if they were to, Brian would probably have it. And he was always super picky on his foods. We were chatting about Christmas coming up and just about Christmas traditions. And he was like, I hate Christmas dinners. They're the worst part about Christmas. I was like, yeah, okay, that's fair. I was like, what would you rather have? And he was like, I want a plain hot dog and some chips. And we were like, we can do that for you. So down to the kitchen, let them know ready for Christmas Day. And on Christmas Day, we gave him that plain hot dog and chips. And he said it was the best Christmas dinner he'd ever had because it was what he wanted. And if Brian hadn't built those connections and that trust with us, he probably wouldn't have felt confident to tell us. But it meant that he had a really, really good Christmas. Yeah, and then we lost Brian on New Year's Eve that year. But without all the work that me and Hannah from Activities had done, he wouldn't have had the funeral that he had. We were able to get cans of cola for everyone who came, and we cheered Brian, and we were able to play the music that we knew he listened to and he loved. We were able to share these stories about him, and we were able to kind of give him his final goodbye. And one of the things he'd said to us in the winter was that he really loved Bideford. Me and Hannah had never been, so we promised him that when it was summer or spring, we'd take him to Bideford. He could show us around, and they've got a really little railway museum station on the top of this hill. So we'd agreed that, and then Brian sadly passed before we could, but we were able to scatter him in Bideford along the bay, and you can see the little railway station at the top. So even though Brian didn't get to take us in the way he'd hoped, we got to go with him. It was just a really lovely memory. Yeah.